Hello and good morning, everyone. Welcome to today's webinar for the presentation of the Research and Innovation Implementation Plan 2022-2025. We are gradually letting everybody in, and then I will leave the floor to Oko Jan Ziegler to begin with the welcoming and presentation of the agenda.
I'll see people joining. Okay, well, good morning to all of you, and thanks for joining this rather special occasion of a presentation of a total overhaul and review of our Research and Innovation Implementation Plan. This edition is regarding the span from this year to 2025. And as you see, we regularly overhaul and review these implementation plans. And luckily we do so because, as you can notice, things do change fast around us. So if we really want to be the pillar for research and innovation regarding smart grids in Europe towards a net zero transition, then we have to definitely put ourselves into question, and whatever we produced a year ago or some years ago, also in terms of roadmaps and vision, has to be overhauled totally. Let alone right now, because what we're seeing also in Eastern Europe is also an accelerator for decarbonization, for electrification, which means a huge pressure on more and more heat pumps and e-mobility becoming real in Europe, and that will have its impacts on the grid. So we will discuss all this in this productive morning. We have two introductory speeches, one by George, who is our policy officer from the European Commission. Welcome, George, and thanks for being with us. And one by Nikos, who is basically the ideator of the whole construct that we discussed together as a leading team within ETIP SNET, but which he is orchestrating with a lot of success in the past and also in the present. And he will guide us through the new concept of high-level use cases, 9 of them all together, and the discussion in particular then in 3 separate sessions of 3 high-level use cases each until 1. So I hope you will stick with us, and I'm sure it will be interesting enough for us to be able to follow. And I'll leave the floor to George for his introduction. Thanks to all of you for being with us.
Thank you, Oko, and good morning, everyone. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can.
Okay, thank you. It is a pleasure to be present at the webinar, and thanks ETIP SNET for the invitation. As Oko mentioned, my name is George Păunescu. I am a policy officer in DG Energy in the unit in charge of research, innovation, and digitalization. And I'm also the main new contact point for ETIP SNET within DG Energy. Apologies for my voice. I hope it will not fail me until the end of my introduction. I'm actually now discovering one of the hidden benefits of virtual meetings. I can be present even if I'm in a coughing mode. I will present you in the next few minutes a brief update on what has been happening in the European energy scene, and that is a lot and is happening at a very quick pace. I will start by recapitulating some of these defining aspects, which are laying down the framework for our common work. Last year, the Commission has put forward a comprehensive proposal to implement the European Green Deal and guide our energy transition. This is the extremely comprehensive Fit for 55 package, which aims to make the EU's climate, energy, land use, transport and taxation policies fit for reducing the net greenhouse gas emissions by at least 55% by 2030 compared to 1990 levels. Achieving these emissions reductions in the next decade is crucial to Europe becoming the world's first climate neutral continent by 2050 and making the European Green Deal a reality. Our strategy is threefold. First is to prioritize the energy efficiency and achieve energy savings. Second, to electrify where we can and to boost the rollout and use of renewables. Last but not at all least, to innovate where we cannot electrify, for instance, by using more low carbon fuels and hydrogen. Then in July 2021, the Commission adopted the first package of 12 legal proposals, which included a targeted revision of the Renewable Energy Directive and Energy Efficiency Directive, a number of other proposals ranging from a targeted revision of the Alternatives Fuel Directive and energy taxation, to a strategy on forests, a carbon border adjustment mechanism, and an extension of the emissions trading system. And third, to set up a new social climate fund to help citizens to finance investments in energy efficiency, new heating and cooling systems, and cleaner mobility. After that, to complement the July package, the Commission adopted in December last year a number of additional legal proposals, including a package on competitive decarbonized gas markets with renewable hydrogen, a new regulation to reduce methane emissions in the energy sector, and the targeted revision of the energy performance of building directives. The adoption by the Parliament and Council of this comprehensive array of legal proposals and their subsequent implementation will put Europe on the right track for climate neutrality by mid-century. Now we know well that the objective and technical challenges that we are facing in energy. The green transition requires a profound transformation of the system. We are switching a paradigm from centralized to decentralized production based on high shares of renewables and entailing a certain level of grid flexibility. Electrification is key in all this, and energy efficiency is, of course, a must. Prosumers become active players, and new grid services are emerging, including aggregation and storage. And this all obviously require a different way of maintaining and operating the networks compared to our traditional centralized energy management methods. Additionally, the sector integration approach aims to link better different energy vectors and systems, thus helping with flexibility, storage, and the security of supply. On top of all this, digitalization is the key enabler and the must-have component, but apart from its overwhelming opportunities, adds new challenges. Unfortunately, as it was already mentioned, there are also external factors adding to this picture. And Europe, after having learned how to deal with pandemic and after putting into this huge political and administrative efforts, it started to manage the process effectively and to help the economies grow back. And also was on its way to address the rising energy prices and put in place relevant mechanisms and safeguards. And then sadly, the geopolitical tensions erupted and have culminated with an armed invasion of a sovereign state in our immediate vicinity. And we see very disturbing information every day. And the consequences for this are unpredictable and quite dire, and that includes high impacts on the energy markets, as we saw, and we keep seeing it. As you all know, the European Union has strongly condemned Russia's aggression and is taking action to address the wide range of challenges that emerge. Well, all these are unprecedented challenges, which seemed unthinkable just a couple of months or years ago. In view of all this, Commission adopted on 8th March the Repower EU communication. The aim is to make Europe independent from Russian fossil fuels well before 2030. And the communication also outlines a series of measures to respond to the rising energy prices in Europe over the past few months, to replenish gas stocks for the next winter, and to transition to renewable gases and hydrogen, and accelerating the European Green Deal. EU leaders and the informal European Council in Versailles on 10 and 11 of March agreed to phase out the dependency on Russian gas, oil, and coal imports as soon as possible. And they invited the Commission to take forward the ideas outlined in Repower EU plan by mid-May. Therefore, the work continued for developing the plan, and very soon after that, on 23rd of March, the Commission had set out ideas for collective European action to address the root causes of the problem in the gas market and ensure security of supply at reasonable prices for the next winter and beyond. And this entailed a legislative proposal on securing minimum 80% gas storage level obligation for next winter, and for ensuring the security of energy supply, and this raises to 90% obligation for the following years. It also adopted a communication setting out the options for market intervention at European and national level and assessing the pros and cons for each option. And finally, the comprehensive development of the Repower EU plan is being prepared for publication by mid-May, as requested by the EU leaders and prefaced by the communication adopted in March. Now, against this very complex and problematic background, with numerous challenges of economic, social, environmental nature, but also political challenges, it remains instrumental that we accelerate our efforts in research and innovation. The development of our smart and digitalized energy networks and services capable of flexible generation and consumption, and to keep the consumer at their core, all these need high investments, but also high innovation capacity and market uptake. Proposing new solutions, testing them, scaling them up, and rolling them out for production, installation, and use is a process that must never stop. ETIP SNET is instrumental in all this, in guiding and informing the European research and innovation programs and actions in the area. I can say that your work is highly appreciated and your products are very valuable. I have discussed with my colleagues that are directly working on shaping the Horizon 2020 and now the Horizon Europe work programs, and work programs. And they told me that the previous implementation of the plan offered them an excellent information, and the current plan greatly updated that information and helped them with our inputs in the upcoming work program 2023-2024 of Horizon Europe. And for all this, I would like to thank ETIP SNET as a whole, but also to its chairmanship for guiding the work, to the very enthusiastic support services for their activities, the leader of the various work packages, and to all the contributors that have been developed, these building blocks, the high-level use cases, and all the substance of this very useful work. We in the Commission services remain indeed very interested in your work, because receiving grassroots information and evidence from ETIP SNET is much appreciated and a good component of our work. And I think that ETIP SNET is in a unique position to provide all this evidence and this kind of approach. And therefore, myself and my colleagues, we are all looking forward to continue to contribute together with you to developing an effective and efficient research and innovation landscape in the EU. Thank you.
George. Very stimulating words, and as you rightly say, a challenging situation we're facing. So we hope we can stand up to these challenges. And Nikas will introduce us into the revision in detail of all these high-level use cases that we defined, 9 altogether. Nikos, the floor is yours. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Mr. Chairman, and thank you for this excellent introduction about the European policies, the European challenges in the new environment with the geopolitical tensions, which I believe also stresses the need for new research and innovation. And ETIP SNET, what I'm going to do next, by the way, I'm Nikos Hadjiargiriou, I'm professor at the University of Athens. Here now I'm speaking as my capacity as technical advisor or ambassador of ETIP SNET. And I'm going to present the implementation plan for the years 2022 to 2025. And just a few words about ETIP SNET in the next slide. For the ones who are not familiar, the ETIP SNET is one of the ETIPs set up by the European Commission to guide, identify research and innovation priorities to support Europe's energy transition. And our work goes beyond smart electricity grids, goes to smart energy grids. Okay. And what we are doing is to bring together the main stakeholders and more than 350 experts from the energy sector from all around Europe. And the idea is to prepare updates of visions, roadmaps, and implementation plans, and to provide a consolidated stakeholder view on how research and innovation to European policy initiatives towards energy transition to achieve medium and long-term objectives. And I believe that the main added value of this platform is that really it consolidates views from the main stakeholders of the energy market, which includes operators, as you see next, national representatives, research and academia, industry, and equipment manufacturers, ICT, storage, and flexible generation, and all main stakeholders through their associations. So if you go to the next slide, you can see that what we have done, we started with a vision that was published in 2018, and has as main ingredients a wide penetration of renewables, variable renewables, both concentrated and distributed. It needs this system that is very complicated in order to work, needs a flexibility portfolio, flexibility provided by distributed resources, next to thermal generation, but also flexibility resources at distribution level, both distributed generation, active customers, and networks. For that, we need storage solutions, and that was very fast to change. And also sector coupling and digitalization. Digitalization is very important to make this complicated system work. And in the next slide, you see also what is the main essence of this work, which combines a number of the various energy vectors that are in the center of this whole new world, where you have renewable electricity, renewable heating, renewable fuels, and at the bottom you see the various consumers, which are now turning to prosumers. So you see the two-direction arrows, and this expands to an extensive electrification, not only of electricity generation, but also of transport, navigation, and also airlines, airfare. And in the middle is the networks. You see the various energy networks that are interacting. They are efficiently coupled to enhance flexibility and efficiency. And these are also accompanied by energy conversion and storage. And in the middle, the backbone of this complicated universe is done by electricity networks because of their flexibility and their efficiency. And again, as I said, this needs widespread digitalization to operate effectively. Next slide, please. So, as I said, one of the main goals is to create roadmaps and implementation plans. We have created the ETIP SNET roadmap for 2020 to 2030 that is a 10-year path towards the future that I briefly described before. And then this roadmap is updated every 2 years. Now we are in the update of 2022. That will be published in 2022. That will cover the next 10 years. And this is split into intermediate steps, implementation plans. And at the moment, what is the purpose of this meeting also is to present the implementation plan 2022-2025 that outlines the priority needs for these next 4 years. If we go to the next slide, you will see that the main drivers of the roadmap and the IP is always to decarbonize energy systems, transport, industry, and buildings. The center of this transposition is the customer. The consumers should be in the center, and this is organized in active consumers who are involved, engaged, and citizen communities. Digitalization is a key enabler of environmental transition and participative energy markets, and of course reliability, adaptability, and resilience of the integrated energy system is at the center, and of course this also means high level of energy security. And this is indeed in accordance with the European policies expressed in Fit for 55 in the European Green Deal. Next slide, please. So in the previous work, when we started, we published in 2020 the energy roadmap that has identified the research areas that we should work on. That was 6 research areas, starting from consumer, prosumer, and citizen energy communities and how to engage them. The second research area was system economics, markets at all levels. The third one was digitalization and its applications, of course, to energy networks. The fourth was about planning the whole energy system, the architectures, and the efficient management of assets. The fifth research area was flexibility at all levels, as I said before, generation, consumers, storage, and also networks. And finally, how you operate the system in an efficient and secure way. And the next slide, you will see that the implementation plan, what we're going to discuss today, is based on these 2 principles. First, we will reuse the basic ideas we have defined in the previous roadmap and implementation plans, the research areas actually. And then we will introduce new concepts, and basically the key concepts of high-level use cases and the priority project concepts. We have done that because high-level use cases are more adapted, are more similar to the European calls for research. So there are groups of areas that we should develop in order to reach the goals of the vision for 2030. Next slide, please. So the basic transformation, as you see here, is that from the research areas that was subdivided to topics and tasks, research functions, we have now moved to the high-level use cases that group results, group outcome of this research. So our high-level use cases are organized in ETIPs, in IPs, implementation plans of 4 years each. And each of these includes the project concepts, the priority project concepts. So we have prioritized the various areas that fall within each of these high-level use cases. Of course, PCs might not end in one high-level use case, might extend to more than one or start later, etc. So what we want to do now in this workshop, in this webinar, is to explain to you what are these high-level use cases, what are the research tasks, and to, of course, try to interact with you and understand if you think that something needs to be changed, if you have more ideas, if you have forgotten something important. And this type of feedback will be very, very welcome and useful. Next slide, please. So for the next 10 years, we think that these 9 high-level use cases are the once that we have planned, we have seen how the various outcomes need to be developed. And if you look at the next slide, let me explain just very briefly say that these are high-level use case 1 that deals with the optimal cross-sector integration of energy grids and then the grid scale storage. High-level use case 2 that speaks about TSO-DSO system and user interactions. So it's important how TSOs and DSOs collaborate to provide flexibility and, of course, efficiency. The third high-level use case speaks about the pan-European wholesale market and also regional and local markets. The fourth is about massive penetration of renewables into transmission and distribution, both as big plants, big PV plants, and also offshore wind and onshore wind. The fifth one is about digital technologies for market participation of consumers at the center. The sixth is about secure operation of power electronics, because as you will hear also, we will have now a network that contains a very large amount of power electronics with their own technical challenges and also opportunities. The seventh high-level use case will be about enhanced system supervision and control, also taking care into account the cybersecurity. The eighth is about transportation integration and storage. So you will hear about how important it is now to see how transportation and electrification of transportation develops together with the energy networks. And the ninth high-level use case, how we can exploit the flexibility provided by buildings, districts, and industrial processes. Under this, you see some indicative budgets. We have assumed somehow arbitrarily that we can spend something like 1 billion euros until 2030 in research and innovation. And this is an indicative distribution among the various high-level use cases. Of course, this is to be amended according to how things develop and what goals are achieved. Now, what we have done next is to take these high-level use cases and identify the project groups, the project concepts, and we have prioritized these project concepts in order to build the next IP. The next IP will cover the period 2022-2025. So the idea today is to discuss, of course, the high-level use cases and focus on the PPCs and especially the priority PPCs that are already included in the IP that has been published recently. And this is an important exchange again to hear your recommendations or ideas of how you think these PPCs should be prioritized, and also if something again important is left out, and left out. So having said that, I think we can move to the next slide. Yes, here is the implementation plan that you can download, and if you've not seen it, this is what we will explain and discuss today. And by that, I conclude this introductory presentation, and in the next hours, we will have organized three sessions where we will focus in each session in 3 of these high-level use cases, and you will discuss in detail the PPCs, especially the ones that will be included in this, have been included in this implementation plan. So thank you for your attention, and I think it is time to move to the first session. I don't know if there is any burning questions? Okay. So there were some questions about the slides. I believe the slides will be available to the ETIP SNET webpage.
Thank you very much, Nikos. And Eduardo speaking. There are no questions for the moment. We are perfectly on schedule, and I think we can go ahead with the first of the sessions. Please, the floor is yours.
Okay, thank you, Eduardo. So the first session, where I will serve as moderator, in that will participate Professor Goran Strbak. Goran is a very well-known person very well-known professor from the Imperial College in UK. And he acts in the ETIP SNET as an advisor, as an expert in the expert group. So let me start. I will say a few words about each of these high-level use cases, and then Goran will guide us through the PPCs. Okay, Goran. Okay, next slide, please.
Yeah, thank you.
So let me start by the high-level use case 1, which is about optimal cross-sector integration and grid-scale storage. The idea is that, as I said also at the beginning, we need now to exploit all energy networks or energy systems, not only electricity, but also the other energy carriers. So far, the traditional energy system has worked in silos, also for electricity, gas transportation, heating and cooling, mobility, transport, etc. And there is a lot of advantages if we see them as coupled and optimized as one overall integrated system that considers also power to X and X to power and large-scale storage technologies. To operate this complex system, to couple them and operate as one system requires new services. And this will be based on higher degrees of automated management and control, including the conversion between these two forms of energy. The decarbonization of the industrial sector, transport, and end-of-use demand at the building level should be supported by smart coordinated control of the interaction between the energy sectors. So this is now the whole area where what we want to move to solve by 2030. And this has been subdivided. Next slide, please. In this priority project concepts, you see two different colors. The ones in dark blue are the ones that have been included in the next implementation plan. So these have been considered as the priority project concepts. The rest one will be also, of course, worked on, but this will be included in later IPs. Okay. So this very briefly to say that this, just before, these PPCs concern the value of cross-sector integration and storage, the operational tools and control tools for operating multi-energy systems, smart asset management, how you will manage the assets of these systems, and for the next years, how integrated hydrogen and CO2 neutral gases, the regulatory framework for cross-sector integration, resilience provided by cross-sector is very important. You know how resilience is important, more and more important as various natural disasters happen, and also cybersecurity. The future cross-sector infrastructure design, and of course you need to validate and demonstrate these technologies in new projects. Having said that, I will pass the word to Goran. Goran, thank you very much for coming, for being with us, and please let us know, explain us the PPCs.
Yeah, thank you very much, Nikos. Was very pleased to work on these IPs and the priority concepts. Is really very important. So can we go to the slide? Cross vectors. Just a second. This is okay. It's slightly different to what we had originally, but okay. I can. Yeah, one of the core aspects of as Nikos mentioned is that we need to move away from the silo operational planning of different energy vectors because there is growing evidence that there is a significant value if we look at that integrated approach, because that can support cost-effective transition to resilient, low carbon future. And this is this priority project concept 1.1 is to do with quantifying these benefits and the value of this together with the large scale energy storage, which will also include different storage technologies. And also there is also a very important aspect to consider also local and in terms of spatial granularity, to look at local and national international level across these cross-sector integration, which hasn't been done in the past yet, and this is something which this PPC will provide fundamentally new evidence in that context. Also, there is a big developments, as mentioned already, in the large-scale energy storage, but we are now going to look at for the first time all of the from different technologies such as electricity, thermal, synthetic liquids, hydrogen, and so forth, and to see how these coordination between these different energy vectors can support cost-effective decarbonization. And also, as Nikos mentioned, also there is a very significant importance and opportunity to provide resilience from the transport, from the coordination between these vectors, and the flexibility, as mentioned already, given the decarbonization pathway, which would include very significant volumes of available renewable generation, that significant flexibility will be required to make that integration cost effective. And this is where the cross-sector integration will provide flexibility to facilitate that. But we need to kind of get in depth in this area to provide fundamental evidence how this is going to operate. So the next slide is showing the control and operational tools for these multi-energy systems is one of the important priority project concepts, because we need to. This is again shift to this digitalized energy paradigm, which would involve advanced technologies and control systems and concepts to actually make that work, which hasn't been that yet done, and that would require exchange of data between different energy sectors, and also look at across different timescales, which is also very important, but also also the spatial granularity in here is critical to move from the to coordinate between local, district level, national level, and also international regional level integration. And this is something which this priority project concept 1.2 is going to focus upon to provide fundamental evidence soon. But also, as Nikos mentioned, some of these areas may also be continue beyond 2035, but it's definitely critically important to be done now to start with that. So the and also we also have the critical topic is about management of the assets, which again hasn't been coordinated and also properly analyzed, because that can also help us to make sure that we make best use of the assets. But that would require, this is where this IoT would be required, Internet of Things would be required, and sensors to make that actually properly work. So we can actually, when we run these and operate this system, that we can actually, make use of the fundamental understanding of the assets based on this communication and data management, which also would require also new innovative assessment, because these concepts in terms of data learning and so forth, data management analysis, has not yet been incorporated in this asset management context, which is going to be very important again to facilitate cost-effective transition. And there is also that these, for the different assets, you can actually use them in a different way, again against different conditions, and also potentially overload them or whatever. But management of that is going to be very critical, and this is where now this Internet of Things sensors, which are getting on, will be important to support that, but also that would also help us to achieve appropriate security and resilience of this, to make sure that we are not getting into massive outages if we don't measure this. And this is where these sensors would also play an important role in creating solutions of using the Internet of Things. So these are the kind of three topics which we are focusing now. But there is, as Nikos mentioned, there is also other very, very important areas in terms of the integration of this integration of energy sectors, which he mentioned already. The cross-sector resilience and infrastructure design is also, and also with the hydrogen and so forth, is very, very important and it is definitely on the agenda.
Thank you very much, Goran, for this comprehensive overview. If you agree, let's ask for questions at the end of the session. And let me go on with the next high-level use case. The next high-level use case of this session is about economics, is about pan-European wholesale markets, and also regional and local markets. So we need to think of a new multi-energy markets that would include this cross-energy sector coupling. It will cover all temporal scales, from seconds to months and years, and also have the spatial granularity from local district to regional and international areas. The emerging flexibility technologies and advanced control systems in all energy sectors would deliver major cost savings, and then we need market designs to address this new. Important to see that new legislation, to recognize that the new legislation asks for enhanced roles of DSOs, particularly in the procurement of ancillary services, flexibility, data management, effective integration of heat and transport sectors. Markets must encourage development of flexible technologies and control systems, and member states must eliminate obstacles to market-based pricing. Bidding zones must be reviewed by TSOs, and possible alternative concepts should be proposed, and DSOs should align network assets and congestion tariffs and changes. Member states should enable scarcity pricing, interconnection, demand-side response, and storage to contribute to capacity market. This is the outline of this high-level use case. Very, very important, one of the basic building blocks of our Vision 2050. And again, I would like to invite Goran to lead us through these PPCs. Yeah, the PPCs now have been grouped, the project concepts have been grouped according to the fundamental market design, about the regulatory framework and strategic investments, about the IT systems, especially for cross-border trading. And then in the future, you need to validate the new market concepts and to develop IT systems for TSO, DSO control to support real-time balancing. So, Goran, the floor is yours for the three first PPCs.
Yeah, thank you, Nikos. As mentioned, one of the big challenges is that is to align the market design with the low carbon agenda, and this is something which is one of the core aspects, but also again to make use of shift to this digitalized paradigm. And to develop fundamentally new, also decentralized multi-energy market, which are critical for again supporting cost-effective transition, low carbon future, but also to have this critically important temporal and spatial granularity, kind of temporal from seconds, minutes, hours, days, years, to have that and also there are links between them, and also to have a granularity to look at the local, national, and international level, because that's critically important to move us to this low carbon future cost effectively. And this is where this focus will be, because currently, as we mentioned already, the flexibility is one of the core facilitator for the cost effective transition. But we currently don't necessarily have that some of these technologies and solutions which would be useful from the whole system perspective, from the startup perspective, may not actually be providing sufficient revenues for investors in these technologies. And this is something which needs to be changed, and because to be a bit critical, still going, although work is very strongly going ahead, but we still need to make sure that we can align the market design with the low carbon agenda, which is where the big challenge is. Because some of these flexibility services, for example, just to give an example, would for example enable us to meet the carbon target by building, for example, less low carbon generation, because we make a better use of them. But there is no currently access to these revenues associated with that. Also, there is also historically a significant proportion of the costs of the system are kind of socialized and not allocated cost effectively to the for this provision of these services. And this is now what needs to be also put in place as to how we are going to make sure that these provision, as they say here, balancing, servicing, charging, investment, and so forth, is done in a cost-effective way, so that that we can also allocate these cost effectively to different market participants in order to move that forward strongly and cost effectively. So that is where the big challenge is. There is also, as mentioned already, given that there is a massive challenge in terms of balancing services, that we need to have coordinated market rather than currently all these different services are in isolation and they need to be linked. And this is something which also showing, if you, for example, got a demand side response, you maybe reduce demand at some point, but you would not need to, recover demand and increase demand later. But that's also this time dependency is very critical also for significantly relevant for balancing services, and also for shorter, very short term in terms of frequency regulation and so forth, and stability, which is very critically important to be included in this assessment. And so this coordination is critically important. Then also we also have challenges associated with having again EU-wide capacity market, as Nikos already mentioned. There is now quite a lot of work in ACER to try to see how we can make use of interconnectors in a more strong way, because this is going to be critically important for moving forward in decarbonization. And that's to do with the fact that interconnectors can also provide significant balancing services, capacity market, in addition to only kind of energy trading. And that is something which is now getting on the agenda to see how we can make that enhance the market to support that. There is also a very significant aspect is also to do with the uncertainties associated with the development of the system, and that some of these flexibility concepts and technologies, including also storage and so forth, could provide what's called option value to make sure that through smart control we can make the right investment decisions in the infrastructure, because you don't know exactly when and where and how much of these, for example, renewables will come and what you should build at this point, because it takes, say, 5 years ahead to actually build it. But we want to make sure that we can actually do that appropriately, rather than, for example, investing into assets which are not turned out not to be required. And this is something where this option value flexibility technology is also a very important part to be included in this, and the uncertainty to be included in the market, so that we can actually, provide these services and support that. There is also very important aspects. How do we compare different technologies, flexibility technologies and conventional technologies on a level playing field? And that requires this assessment, fundamentally new approach, which would enable us to compare on a level playing field, different technologies such as, say, storage, transmission, demand side response, different generations, so forth. How do we do them in a coordinated fashion so that we can actually compare them cost effectively? This is something that the market needs to develop. This is particularly related to this provision, again, across different services, so that across different technologies. And this is something where significant development is required. So if we just go quickly through the, sorry, I'm talking probably too much.
No, that's fine. Thank you.
Yeah, there is also important is to have in mind that we are entering into a different, fundamentally different future, and that we, rather than historically and currently looking into only kind of incremental approaches, what needs to be done now between now and next 5 years, we need to look at what actually will be required, in next 30 years, where we want to be, when we want to go to net zero, what that is. And then the question is how we are going to now make use of those longer term future to be able to develop the regulatory framework, but also to make sure that we carry out these strategic investment which are required in infrastructure to make sure that we move forward. And obviously some analysis has been demonstrated that we need to think about future strategically rather than only incrementally, in order to get again cost effectively to this low carbon world. And that's again requires a regulatory market framework to include this strategic investment in the infrastructure. And also this is also linked very strongly with the framework for supporting security and resilience of the system. And again, both at the local, national and international level is something which is also a big challenge, which this priority project concept will address. And you can see it's going up to, it's a 2029 in here, but it may also go forward. So if we go to the next one.
Thank you, Goran.
Yeah, this is again to have this to make sure that we have a proper cross-border trading, which is demonstrated. It's got a massive benefits that we need to have a kind of pro-European wide approach to decarbonization rather than member state centric approach, and that's something which is now getting on the agenda. This is where the cross border will provide, but also what we need to do is to have platforms and information technologies which would enable us to develop this market-based trading of energy and zero services across interconnection. And we want to try to start developing these platforms and information systems so that we can actually make that, demonstrate that this can be done.
Thank you very much. And let's move to the final high-level use case, which is about transportation, integration, and storage. So it's already written that the integrated system approach is required to put the transport sector on a sustainability path, which requires actions on overall vehicle efficiency, promoting low and zero emission vehicles and infrastructure, long-term switch to low and zero carbon electricity and alternative net zero carbon fuels, and further encouraging multimodal integration and shifts towards more sustainable transport modes. And very important for the networks is, of course, how we can have publicly accessible and private recharging points that be efficiently integrated into the system. And it is open to speak about all transport sectors, all transport, micromobility, private vehicles, taxi and fleet vehicles, buses, lorries, railway transport, waterborne transport, and airborne transport. For fuel energy used, low carbon sources could be electricity and lower carbon fuels, or combination of both. And the focus is on the assessment of the role and value of alternative approaches for the transport sector decarbonization, considering the impact on energy system operation and design, and the benefits of achieving cost-effective transition to zero carbon energy future, as the interface between transport and energy sectors is a crucial element for ensuring the successful development for both sectors. It's very important to understand that this integrated approach, the interface between transport and energy sectors, is a crucial element to decarbonize both sectors. And here, if we look at the PPCs, in the next slide, we can see that we need to look at the technical and economic implication of decarbonization to transport sector, and how to enhance the effectiveness of energy system operation and resilience with electromobility, while again you need more demonstration activities, policies and markets, and also interoperable planning of the two sectors. So Goran, please.
Yeah, thank you, Nikos.
Explain the first two.
Yeah, so this first one related to the decarbonization of transport sector, as Nikos mentioned, we need to look at the the decarbonization strategy for this transport sector, and that would also include all the vehicles we discussed from electricity, but also hydrogen based, and also from, you can see in here, from micromobility to public fleet and so forth, because there is for example, for rivers and the seas, sea boats and so forth, there is now very strong interest in for example, building these hydrogen stations, say in offshore and so forth, where the renewables are. But also we would also need to think about how we're going to decarbonize that, but also aviation. So that's also to have in mind that this includes wide region, wide area of this, and also what needs to be done is how we're going to actually support funding for these strategies for this decarbonization, because as you know, there is a significant investment, for example, in renewables, which are also kind of supported by the government, but also we need something similar to make sure that we've got the funding for decarbonization of transport sector, which is still to be developed. But that's something which is to look at the alternative approaches to how that can be done cost effectively. And also it's also important, as mentioned already, we want to have in here whole systems of implications on the agenda, that we look at the decarbonization strategies of the transport sector, but also from the whole system perspective, including the infrastructure in the system side, and that is very important for meeting the carbon targets cost effectively, to have this holistic approach to this. And one of the aspects in that area is to do assessment of the system value of these, for example, smart electromobility, for example, which could include also, other sectors, and also, plug-in hybrids and also hydrogen fuel cell and so forth. Because we would, as mentioned, we would need to have significant increase in services to support operation of the, system with renewables. And this is something where again, having the holistic approach and look at the smart concept of these technologies can actually provide very, very significant benefits. In the context of, there is also kind of the concerns about the negative implications that that, for example, transport sector electrification could then, if we use these batteries to support the system, could potentially lead to degradation, and that needs to be also addressed because, on the analysis which is being carried out recently, we demonstrate this vehicle to grid concepts would be, in fact, and services would be delivered relatively very frequently when you have some problems and you would then inject power, in which case that may not be the case, but that's something which needs to be really proven and provide evidence about what's the link between this system benefits from the transport sector to what is the implications on the technology inside. There is also very strong now development in building what's called rapid charging infrastructure, charging stations, and there are now the demonstrations in this area emerging, and also these charging infrastructure will be used to for example, to charge fast the electric vehicles, but also produce hydrogen for sources. For example, there is in rivers and the seaside. So that's also something which is now big on the agenda, and that could provide significant benefits also to the system. And that's something which the second one, it says in here that we want to also analyze how we should design these rapid charging infrastructure in order to provide these services to the system. And that's also something which is also very important to be in this particular priority project concept. Also, we need to also make sure that there is no big compromise on the service quality delivered by the users, which is again to use with this charging, end use perspective for the charging, but to provide the benefits is also, so how we can balance the two. And some of the analysis demonstrates, for example, that if we are provide availability to provide these services, that the value could be so massive that in fact the users who provide this should actually get paid for charging their vehicles, because the benefits of these services is massive. And that's also to do with there is now big discussions and developments regarding the offshore charging facilities, which is to in order to be able to supply boats and vessels in the offshore. And that's also something which is happening now, for example, in the North Sea, where there is a big discussion and the way forward to try to see how we can move forward to actually link these two concepts. So if we go to the next one, please.
Goran, please try to be quick because the time is coming.
Sorry, this is just to mention here that in addition to system operation, which we discussed, there is also a potentially massive opportunity to enhance resilience in the local areas with electromobility. For example, a number of cities in Europe will now want to have their buses and taxis electrified, in the next 10 years, and there will be in some of these big cities, there will be tens of gigawatts of batteries in buses and taxis and so on. And so we can actually, if there is some big problem with resilience, you can actually use these resources to supply essential demand. And also this would also provide what's called mobile storage, which is also very important, which would enable us to provide these services and enhance resilience of the system, which is critically important. And that's also where potentially these fast charging stations, which are going to be also based on large-scale storage could also potentially provide these security services both to the the local but also national level. So this is just an example to link this interaction between transport sector and energy sector, which would actually enhance resilience very significantly. Thank you, Nikos.
Thank you very much.
Colleagues.
Thank you, Goran. Thank you for this comprehensive overview, the PPCs of these 3 high-level use cases. The time, I don't know, Eduardo, do you have time to answer a question in the chat?
We have 3 minutes, and we
Okay.
have a couple of questions in the chat, so I guess we can try to answer them. Can you read them, or do you want me to read them aloud?
Let me.
Can you read them, please?
Ask Goran. The question is, how is integrated management system possible given the fact of unbundling? I think the question refers to the management integrated of the various sectors of the various energy carriers, how the integrated management is possible given the fact of unbundling. Should they share data, business data? And the question is if unbundling and antitrust competition laws are a hurdle to this integrated management.
Yeah, I mean, it is a challenge in terms of how we're actually going to make it happen. But what we are now looking to this is to provide evidence regarding the role and value of this and what needs to happen so that we can then move into this integration. Although we are moving into unbundling definitely of these services, but there will be also significant benefits for the energy sector if the market is appropriate to actually integrate different sectors, because that would provide benefits in terms of getting to the low carbon more cost effectively. And you're absolutely right. The challenge is in terms of how this is going to be actually deployed and implemented in the context of the policy and the market is a very big challenge. But that's something which is on the agenda. Appreciate that. Thank you.
Thanks. Okay. There's another question that asks if the PPCs will end up in EU-funded projects. I think this is not a question for us to answer. So.
Yeah, I don't know the answer to that question.
Yeah. And then there's another question by Laurent Schmidt that with all the EV deploying and potentially offering V2H resiliency, vehicle to home, should not we reconsider resiliency bottom up, accepting, for instance, lower grid availability and targeted load shedding?
Yeah, that's also a very good question. This is something which we have been also providing some evidence, but this needs to be done, which is that regarding resilience, that we want to have also potentially paradigm shift from the resilience provided by historically at the national level to actually be through that what we demonstrated, the kind of the microgrids at the local level could provide resilience, what we say, to megagrids. And that is very, very important topic, which is also big on our agenda to make that transition properly. And this is absolutely one of the critical points in terms of, and also that's where the vehicles are going to play a major role in enhancing resilience at the local level.
Okay, thank you very much. Thank you, Goran. Thank everybody. I want to thank you also for your questions. And the floor back to Eduardo.
Thank you very much, Nikos. Thank you very much, Goran. There is actually the George Monescu who just rose his hand. George, the floor is yours. Do you have a question?
Yes, thank you. No, just very quickly about the question about PPCs ending up in funded projects. I think the way to end up in there, well, to start being there is to be part of the PPCs or a concept of, similar to that, to be part of the Horizon Europe work programs. And the co-creation of the work program is quite a complex mechanism. And many players are working on that. So, of course, sending this report not only to us in DG Energy, but to other players that are contributing to that, for instance, to member states, representatives of the member states will increase the chances of getting similar to what happens there. So that's it. That's the intention. But just to say that the process is it's quite complex. And because I'm at the beginning of my experience with ETIP SNET, I am actually I'm not quite sure what is your reach out. How do you interact with, for instance, with the representative of the member states that are dealing with research and innovation? Yeah, thank you.
Thank you. I didn't know if
Thank
Oko
you,
would like
George.
to answer that, or just to say that, would Oko like to say something here, or shall I perhaps add that
Thank you, Nikos.
we are in contact with also the member states through the stakeholder group. Perhaps Oko wants to say more about that. Yeah.
But normally we don't take direct contact to a political scene, so we leave it to the commission that is our policy officer, in this case George, to be an intermediary to pass on the messages. But obviously, as he rightly says, then at the end of the day, all our contributions in terms of what we're discussing here today, for example, are eventually being analyzed by the staff that is working on the programs and on the research packages of Horizon Europe. So yes, indirectly at least, and for sure, most of these results here are contributing and going into the Horizon Europe. But it's not something that we do project per project. It's something that is valid overall. So for now, that's what I would say. We'll try later on this spring also to liaise directly with the Commission representatives, because we are reviewing the ETIP SNET altogether, and then that will be strategic discussions also with the Commission that will allow us to address these issues. But as George mentioned previously, for now, it's an indirect contribution. So we're basically delivering the pillars of know-how and of guidance and strategic directions in which to push research and innovation over the coming years, and that is being taken up by the people in charge then of designing Horizon Europe projects.
If I may add something, Oko,
Sure.
just I would like to say that first, we have a national stakeholders coordination group that is in close contact. So we exchange these views with the national representatives. And also the ETIP SNET organizes regional workshops that in the next ones we will work closer with the EU member states, and where we will exchange how the local programs and the regional programs develop, how they are aligned to the general ETIP SNET views on how research should be done. So I think we'll have now much more closer interaction with the member states, also through the next workshops. So having said that, it's back to you again, Eduardo.
Thank you very much. I think that at this point we can call a coffee break to take a break and stretch our legs and take a coffee, and we can normally it is scheduled for 15 minutes, so we should be back in 10 minutes for now, given that we are running a little bit late. So let's get back at 11:25. Thank you.
Thank you, colleagues.
Okay, it should be now time to get back on track and to go ahead with the session number 2. The speakers will be Nuno Silva and Aris Dimes. I leave you the floor. To begin, I'll move to the next slide, and the floor is yours.
Thank you, Eduardo. Next slide. So the next high-level use case, the title is Market-Driven TSO-DSO System User Interaction. The starting point is the cooperation for the exchange of coordinated balancing and congestion handling services. These services can come from distributed generation, conventional power plants, and controllable loads. However, a key part of this high-level use case is the consumer, and to actively involve them, the consumer could be an individual, a community, or an organization. And we should focus on a prosumer-centric system design and operation. Of course, we should have a win-win situation, so both the prosumer and the operators should have benefits from this cooperation. And this cooperation and the interaction should be market-driven and also applicable to heterogeneous geographical, social, and economic conditions. So planning and operational coordination and flexibility mechanism should be market-based. Thank you. Next slide. So the proposed PPCs in this implementation plan are 6. The first 4 should be the starting period, should be the period 2022 and 25. The first is the development of market models and architecture for TSO-DSO system user interaction. Next one is focusing on control and operation for enhanced TSO-DSO system user interaction. The third one focuses on the development of platform for the DSO cooperation. The last PPC we propose to start this period is the development of planning tools for TSO-DSO cooperation. And the last 2 PPCs, the PPC 2.5, the title is Viable Business Case through Market Mechanism and Incentives. And the final one is governance for TSO-DSO and system users. So, Nuno, can you give us more details about the first 4?
Yes, sure. Thank you very much, Aris. Very good. So it was good to have that overview regarding the high-level use case to begin with. And so let me dive a little bit in more detail on those priority project concepts, in particular the 2.1, which is related with the architecture and how does the market models work between the TSO, the DSO, and the system user, not necessarily the final user at home, but it can be even a community, it can be a system user in general that makes use of the grid and of the system. Again, have in mind that these PPCs they do not have to be encompassed only into one implementation period of 4 years. That's why you see here in the title that it starts now, because it was considered that this is important to start with this one already. Although we have a high-level use case concept for 10 years, we believe that these elements that we have included in the first 4 PPCs should be started immediately, and it doesn't mean that it will finish in the first 4 years. As you can see, the projects associated with this concept, because this is a family of projects, they are going to span from 2022 until 2027 at least, and so that's our vision at the moment. And so what we are talking about here in this particular PPC 2.1 is the several aspects which are mentioned there. So it's looking into the different market models for the interaction between the TSOs and the DSOs, not only in central markets, but also in local markets, and with all the characteristics that have to be checked in terms of the characteristics of the local markets in particular, if there are market failures or not, in which situations. And that's why it is important also to look into the different time frames. And so we are looking here not only at a very large planning concept time frame, but also going into an operational time frame, going to back to the down to the day ahead and even to the intraday markets. Of course, the idea here is to look also into the technical, the market, and the business barriers that could be present, and try to figure out ways to remove that to allow a smooth and more intense cooperation between the TSOs and the DSOs, and also make sure that the system users, here mentioned as the prosumers, can in fact make use of the system. That's a key element from the policies from the European Commission, not only at the Green Deal level, but also on the Fit for 55. The idea that the consumers and the system users should have good mechanisms to interact with the system and to bring all of them on board. And so identify what are the key benefits also of using market-driven options, as mentioned before. And again, this is a strong point also from the European Commission, that the solutions should be primarily market-driven. So that is the main idea. Of course, if there are some distortions here and there, we should try to accommodate that and get rid of them. But the concept is try to use market-driven solutions as much as possible. Of course, all these solutions, we have to test them and to trial them, and that's why research and innovation and demonstrations are very important. We have to test them in different geographical, social, and economic conditions. Of course, there is an idea of an internal European market, but Europe is not homogeneous, not even in terms of generation, in terms of load characteristics, and so even from a social point of view. And so we have to test these solutions in heterogeneous geographical, social, and economical conditions. Again, as Aris mentioned, there is a need to have a win-win situation here, so that we create value for the energy system as well. And so the concept of maximization of the welfare is not only embodied in the, let's say, European Commission mindset, but that's also a key element of the internal market and the internal energy market that we need to create. So how to maximize the value from the consumer's point of view, and also from the system point of view, to reduce inefficiencies. And so we have to look into the different time frames, as mentioned, the operational and the planning, and try to figure out all the solutions to unlock the potentials for prosumers. We know and we hear time and time again that sometimes there is the ability or the interest in participation in the market, but the mechanism is not there, either from the technology point of view, or from the regulatory point of view, or from other bureaucratic, sometimes at the administrative point of view. And so we have to create mechanisms that allow all of that. If we move to the next PPC 2.2 within this high-level use case, then we are talking not so much at the market level and the architecture, which was the previous one. Now we are talking about the control and operation. Okay, so how can we effectively have control mechanisms and technologies to allow this participation? And here we have in mind that we can also say that, okay, we have been doing this for the last several years. And so this is something that it's already embedded in our, let's say, research and innovation community, also in the industry. But what I think it's important to mention here is that in our thinking process, we see that there are new developments that require these control and operation technologies to be in place. In particular, the cross-sectoral aspect, and the fact that a lot of consumers and a lot of users of the system, now they are not coming necessarily from the electrical world. They for sure come from the energy world, but they can come from heating and cooling. They can come from hydrogen, let's say, energy vectors, mobility aspects as well. And so there are a lot of different elements that are in the ecosystem, in the concept from the ETIP SNET vision point of view of system of systems. And so we have to find control mechanisms and technologies that allow the prosumers that come from all these heterogeneous energy vectors and energy systems to be able to interact with the system. And so doing this in an optimized operation way. So this is not an easy task. It's a complex challenge for the research, innovation, and even for the industry community, and also from the regulation and also the political encompassing views of all the system. How to make these in an optimized way and allow, for instance, the distributed resources to provide ancillary services and ensure resilience from the network, from the system point of view, because now there is much more elements, heterogeneous elements with different characteristics, again, coming from different energy vectors that are interacting with the system. And so much more potential failure points, but also much more controllability that we have at the moment with a lot of technologies coming up and a lot of devices coming up. Again, here the digital technologies are key. The ability to interact and communicate, the IoT aspects which were mentioned before, and the digitalization elements that can be brought into the system are key to allow not only the resilience of the system, but the optimization of the operation as well. And so the digitalization aspect is always key here, and not only at the physical and the telecommunications level, but also at a higher level with analytics and big data information that, based on the understanding and the intelligence that we can put on top of these digital technologies, then we can make more efficient decisions and more educated guesses on how to go forward. So this is the aspects which are going to be dealt within this, again, family of projects. The priority project concepts are concepts around all these elements. If we move to PPC 2.3, then we see that we are going much more into another element which is key in all this thinking process, which is creating appropriate platforms for the cooperation. There was a question before on how can we have an integrated management if we have unbundling. Well, I don't think that is a problem with that. The integrated management means that the different entities can interact and have to interact in an efficient way. Integrated management does not mean that everybody is in the same body and we go back in the unbundling process and it is the same entity taking care of everything. No, integrated management means that there are good platforms and good mechanisms to interact in a secure and with a good governance mechanism in place for the information sharing. And so that is a key element here to ensure what was mentioned before, that there is an integrated management for this. And having in mind, again, we could say that, okay, these platforms already exist for TSO, DSO. They were much more thought of for the electrical world in the past, and now with this dimension of enlarging the energy system with other energy vectors, it's important to see if it fits or what needs to be updated, and there is a lot of research and innovation to be done there, how to integrate in this world also the gas, the hydrogen, and all the new solutions that have been put forward, heating and cooling devices, the idea of bringing more heat pumps into the system, also the recent directives from December last year on the competitive decarbonization of the gas market, and also the buildings directive. So all of these have to be checked if a platform is in place or a family or a federation of platforms is in place to allow this to happen. Still in this initial phase, so the PPC 2.4, it is something that needs to be started immediately as well. It's always a challenge to identify priorities here, because for people who work on this, we see urgency in a lot of topics, but in particular, planning tools are key. And so there are already some incipient activities on how to have planning tools that are able to integrate all these cross-sectoral elements and to make sure that this cooperation and integrated management between TSOs and DSOs is still in place. This is something that for sure is not going to be done quickly, and with the dynamics that the system has, we see this as something that, although it starts now with this IP, as you can see in the title of the IP, PPC 2.4, it starts now in the IP, in the implementation plan 22-25, but we see this as something that will last for a long time. So it will span across multiple implementation plans. And though here we are talking about long-term planning, tools that can allow for making these evaluations and simulation, and the idea of extracting the value and making this all efficient, not only at a local level, but also at a global level, and also taking into consideration this heterogeneity of the multi-prosumers, typologies, and aggregations. And so you see a lot of different elements in here. Of course, then there are other PPCs, which were mentioned before by Aris. They are not going to start immediately, and so they are coming up in the future implementation plan. But these are the 4 that are going to be kicked off throughout this year. Aris, maybe we can move to the next high-level use case.
Yes. Next slide, please. Okay, the title of high-level use case 4 is massive renewable penetration into the transmission and distribution grid. The starting point for this high-level use case are the ambitious targets by EC for RES penetration. The key elements is the Green Deal package and the Fit for 55 framework. Just a parenthesis here that the goals of EU Green Deal and Fit for 55, we are trying to include them in all high-level use cases, not only this one, but renewable penetration is something really ambitious. So these high-level use cases considers both the transmission and the distribution network. We consider a centralized renewable installation at transmission level and distributed renewables in both transmission and distribution level. This will create several challenges, such as less natural inertial with increased imbalances. And we should improve forecast and develop sophisticated analytics. Of course, we should increase the accuracy of monitoring, of global monitoring, especially in the distribution grid. We should focus on market dynamics and new market designs to ensure the participation and reduce the risk for vulnerable consumers. And of course, key aspect is energy system resilience that should be assured in the context of massive RES penetration, counting, of course, with contribution of storage and flexibility solutions. Next slide, please. So again, we have 4 PPCs that we propose to start this period. Of course, the actual length, as said by Nuno, could be longer than 4 years. The first 4 PPCs, so the first one is technical barriers and technical measures for integration of RES at multiple levels and sectors. Next one is control and operation tool for a RES-based energy system. Next one is infrastructure requirements and network technologies as solutions for integration of massive RES. And again, we have planning for a resilient system with massive penetration of renewables. And the last 2 to be considered in future IPs. The first one is well-functioning markets for a REST-based energy system. And the last one is policies and regulation for a REST-based energy system. Nuno, if you could analyze the first 4 of them.
Yeah, very good. Thank you very much, Aris. Yes, so in this high-level use case 4, so we are in the domain, let's say, of maximizing the introduction of renewables in the system, being it at the distribution level or the transmission level. And so the focus here is much more on the renewables. Of course, it touches several elements that you have seen also in the previous high-level use cases. As you can see, this complex system, it's not prone to be set in separate boxes that you can isolate them very well in completely different concepts. So you see that the idea of markets, integrating renewables, distribution on one side and transmission on the other, they are transversal to the different high-level use cases, and there are some areas that touch upon other high-level use cases. That's why I wanted to put a tone here from the renewables point of view, instead of the other dimensions which were analyzed before. And so, as George mentioned in the introduction, so there is a very strong tone from the European Commission of increasing the share of renewables and continuing in that path that already started probably more than 10 years ago. And so the idea of increasing more share of renewables, and also in line with the recent declaration of Versailles, of the trying to maximize the independence of Europe in terms of resources coming from outside of Europe, for very different reasons, and maximize the use of the endogenous resources. And so here on the PPC 4.1, we are looking at technical barriers and how to identify technical solutions to integrate the most of renewables at different levels and coming from different sectors. And so the idea of bringing more from the capillary level at the industrial level, residential actors and energy communities, how do we reduce the barriers, in particular technical barriers, to allow them to integrate easier in the system. Since we want to make it much quicker, I think it's important to have an highlight here on how and what can we do in order to maximize the introduction of all those potential renewables at different energy vectors, and again at different levels. As a PPC 4.2, so the second family or a second priority project concept, the 4.2 will look then into the control and operational tools of these renewables and their integration. And so the issue here is much more on the control mechanisms and what are the network constraints that can exist in order to get them into the system. So things like the improved forecast tools, and make sure that we increase the capacity of the transmission system. How can we expand the offshore grid? How to maximize also the hosting capacity in the distributed network. How can we have demand-side management control and the distributed energy resources control, and even hybrid power systems. So there has been some work also in the Horizon 2020 and currently in the current programs. How can we intensify more the concept of hybrid power systems so that the systems at a more capillary level can integrate easily in the system without jeopardizing and even not being part of the problem, but being part of the solution of creating a system which is reliable and efficient as well. And so those are the elements that we should bring also into the thought process of the project concepts under 4.2, and how the flexibility can be maximized from heating and cooling devices, from mobility sector and vehicles as well, land vehicles, but also, as we have seen before in the previous communications, on ships and coming from rivers, and all the dimensions of mobility to be considered here. And so how to ensure that we have control and operational tools for all these new heterogeneous elements in the grid. If we move to the next slide on the PPC 4.3, then we are looking much more, so not so much at the control elements at the edge of the network, but on the infrastructure requirements and what solutions are needed at, let's say, a networking point of view and grid level. And so we are talking here about how can we ensure that we have flexible mechanisms, not only at transmission with FACTS, at distribution with FACTS, all these flexible, even AC transmission system tools to make the integration of renewables and the problems related with different fluxes of energy, instead of being only downstream to upstream to downstream, also reverse flows to be under control, efficient, and without creating excessive costs in the system, even to reduce the the inefficiencies from rerouting traffic or from congestion management mechanisms, which can be expensive for the system as well. And so the idea to integrate efficient and reliable connections, not only at the grid level, at the boundary level of the system, but also at large central renewable energy generation, like large offshore grids. Then we move to the talking about another element which is important to start and be considered to be at the priority level that should start now. Again, you see that in PPC 4.4, so the concept associated with the planning of a resilient system with this massive penetration of renewables. Although it starts in the implementation plan 22-25, the idea is that it will spawn more implementation plans, and so will not be restricted to the implementation plan. And we see these again, as I mentioned before in the previous high-level use case number 2 regarding the TSO, DSO, and system user coordination. It is something on this planning level that we see as going throughout the complete timeline of the high-level use case, which is the 10 years. And here again, it's bringing to the system all the elements that can ensure the resilience. And with all these renewable sources that are entering the system at a more increased level. If in the past there were questions of whether 25% would be the limit for the renewables to be well accommodated, then we saw that 50% was okay, and then we have to move into a net zero solution by 2050, which surely requires us to create planning mechanisms that allow this massive penetration of renewables at all levels in the system, not only transmission, but also at distribution, and coming from different energy vectors. Again, here, making the planning and having this long-term view, also with a resilient mindset of robustness to extreme events. So this is something that is occurring more frequently. We have seen that occurring more often also in Europe. So this is something that we have to ensure that our planning mechanism, which is increasingly complex because of all the integration of different energy vectors, that this planning is done for maximizing the integration of renewables. So here in this high-level use case 4, the concept is much more the renewable issues and what are the renewables issues that have impact on the planning activities. And so this is related to high-level use case 4. Maybe, Haris, we can move to the high-level use case 6, the last one of this section of 3.
Okay, next high-level use case. The title is Secure Operation of Widespread Use of Power Electronics at All System Levels. Of course, we all know that power electronics are becoming key asset of the modern power grids, and the penetration is in all system levels. But there is not an overarching concept of how this device will shape the system operation. So as this, the share and the penetration of power electronics grows, we need to have to involve them and give them a more active role. However, in this high-level use case, we pay a special consideration on the transmission grid, and especially the evolution of high voltage DC networks and the concept of multi-terminal, multi-vectors meshed DC grids. This is appearing mainly on offshore application, but are expected to spread also on onshore solutions, and also to medium voltage application. And of course, there's also specific focus on grid forming converters, and still there is need more research, and also to include the concept of modern substation and the use of solid state transformers and facts. Next slide. So for this implementation plan, the Our proposals for the project concepts are the first one is control solution for next generation PV and battery inverters. Next one is hybrid transmission, distribution, and hybrid distribution AC/DC grids. Next one, the title is next generation distribution substation. And the last one, simulation methods and digital twins at distribution and transmission network for power electronics driven networks. In future IPs, we propose three project concepts, priority project concept. The first one is HVDC interoperability, multi-terminal configuration, meshed grids. The next one will focus on large-scale demonstration activities, and the last one on standardization activities. So, Nuno?
Before we proceed, I would just like to remind you that we have a little bit less than 10 minutes scheduled for this session.
Okay.
Very
Please.
good, thank you, Eduardo. And thank you, Arius, for this more encompassing view of the high-level use case 6. And so again, here, as you can see, we are in the domain much more of power electronics. And power electronics brought not only by renewables, but other devices also, which are critical in the system. So if in high-level use case 2, we were in the domain of system coordination between transmission, distribution, and the system user. On high-level use case 4, we were in the domain of how can we maximize the integration of renewables in the system. And here in this number 6, which is related, that's why we have encapsulated the three of them together in this second session. It's about power electronics, which is very much related with renewables, of course with storage as well and with other devices, but it is a key element that we have to think of when we are thinking about massive penetration of renewables. One key element that comes to the mind is the implications that the power electronics will have in the system. And so they have, of course, key implications on the system operation, in the stability, the voltage stability and the frequency stability, the fact that there is a lack of reactive power provision or demand during large disturbances, as power grid electronic interface generation has no or limited capability of working with reactive power. That creates some issues. Also on the frequency stability side, the lack of natural inertia creates issues regarding the rate of change of frequency, the rock-off, and so there are elements that we have to take into account in order to maximize the integration of renewables and the creation of independence that, as I mentioned, in the recent declaration of Versailles in March, is key for the future development of the European energy system. And so all the aspects related with the reduced system strength and the reduction in the fault currents, the lack of sufficient fault current that can result in misoperation of protection systems. So all these has to be taken into consideration, and in particular in this first priority project concept 6.1, we are talking about control solutions. In particular for PV and battery inverters are mentioned here, but these concepts are throughout the whole high-level use case. As mentioned, again, reminding these for all, I think it's important to stress that these priority project concepts, this one starts in this first implementation plan, 22-25, but again, it spawns to more than one implementation plan. As you can see, the idea is that work on these concepts will go from 2022 until 2029. And so here we are looking into how can we ensure that the inverters are grid friendly. Green friendly, meaning that they, as I mentioned before, they are part of the solution and not only part of the problem. Of course, all these creates a lot of problems to the grid, but the fact that we have electronics that are controllable and also easily controllable in some cases allows us to bring all these in a fashion that can be friendly, and the idea ideally would be to facilitate this in a plug and play digital way. On the PPC number 2, we look not so much on the integration of these edge elements of PVs and batteries, but we look into the grids and to the networks. And so we are talking about hybrid transmission distribution and also hybrid AC and DC grids. Again, this is something that starts now, 2025. We believe it will take more time than just one IP to have a clear grasp of the challenges around here and the issues around here. And so there is a need to create the appropriate control solutions and ensure also that there is good interoperability here. And so the coordination between converters, all that has to be tested and validated in order to ensure these solutions. If we move to the final and last slide, which just briefly describes the other two priority project concepts that we envisage within this high-level use case related to electronics. Again, we are looking into, as Aris mentioned, new generation distributed substations. And so we are looking into how to integrate more power electronics into the substation and create it as an element which is a flexible and programmable power grid element in the system. And so basically going for solid state solutions in which the substation is basically an energy router. And so we are talking about creating solutions or energy router solutions which can then be very well integrated in the systems in a flexible way and in a controllable way to ensure that all of these is well managed. Of course, within this topic, there are a lot of system codes and grid codes are already being worked upon in order to ensure that the responses of the system and the responses of the different elements are according to the grid needs. And so the contribution at the European level to the grid codes that are needed to be changed and addressed within this, let's say, new framework is something that research and innovation needs to tackle to keep on contributing to the development of appropriate system codes and issues like synthetic inertia, prioritization of active and reactive power, enhanced frequency control capabilities, and also looking into different time frames, not only the operational real time, but also in quasi real time solutions. Again, looking into the synchronous condensers as we move from synchronous generators into synchronous condensers world, which can provide benefits like short circuit currents, inertia, and dynamic reactive power. Those are elements which are thought of for this new generation of substations. Finally, we enter into a world that needs to start immediately as well. And as mentioned there, the first starting implementation plan 22-25 is to be able to simulate these in a way which is quick and efficient. And the idea of bringing digital twins to our modus operandi on a daily basis, it's critically important. So the bringing digitalization to this world as well, in which we can have digital twins at transmission and also distribution level in a world that is much more, let's say, electronics driven. It's key to create simulation tools that allow to evaluate all these systems and solutions. And I think so that I think it's clear that as we move away from a traditional rotating machines world and with this massive penetration of renewables and all these policies that the Energy Green Deal and the Fit for 55 and ideas of getting independence and using our own resources in Europe make it key to pay attention to power electronics converter-based generations and loads. And I think with this, I finish. I think we have 2 minutes still within this session.
Yes, I think we have one question. This came when you were describing priority project concept 2.1, market models and architecture for DSO consumer integration. And the question is, how could a new market model be tested in reality? And if you could give us an example, a proposal, how to do.
Yeah, I think this is something that it is not new for the world of the people ourselves that are working on the research and innovation world. This is something that we have been increasingly being able to do, in particular with the regulatory sandboxes and with solutions that can be confined. We have experiences already in several Horizon 2020 and also in these Horizon Europe programs. And of course, I don't want to confine myself to the calls of the Horizon Europe in 2020. I mean, there are a lot of other elements and activities going on in parallel in which these market models have been tested. And so we have examples of projects, and I encourage the interested people to look into the bridge organization, which is an organization which the European Union.
Sorry, no. Could I ask people to mute themselves?
It is done. Sorry.
Okay.
And so if we look into the bridge community, which is a community of large or medium size, at least, European projects in which these elements have been addressed, within the bridge community, we have several work streams. One of the work streams is related with markets and regulations. And so you can see there several examples of regulatory sandboxes that were created for a particular testing of a solution, because as I mentioned before, several of the solutions are not going to be uniform throughout Europe. And so they have to be tested, of course, locally, in some cases also nationally, in other cases between more than one country or even regional. And so those are elements which are being put in several projects, and we have had several successes on testing in reality some of these market models, sometimes in a controlled version and a reduced size, let's say, but which are statistically significant to make an assessment of the validity of the solution. So I hope this helps to answer a bit the question.
We don't have any other question. No, we have a follow-up question. How long would such test last?
Yeah, in several examples on previous projects and the research and innovation projects that we have had, some of these regulatory sandboxes, they lasted for months and even for 1 year in some cases, because there were some requests from the, let's say, the project concept point of view, that it was needed to create a solution and it should be under test for at least 6 months or 1 year. And so these tests, of course, they don't last forever, because very often in the regulatory sandbox, they are allowed an exception for a period of time. And it can be several months, of course. It depends also on the national regulatory authorities and sometimes coordination between countries in order to allow these to be done. But I would say clearly months, which allow more than just a quick 1 hour testing if something is working or not. And so this is large time frames. Thank you.
Thank you, Nuno. I think that's all. We don't have any other questions, so we can move to next session.
Indeed. Thank you very much, Aris and Nuno, for this comprehensive and detailed explanation. We can now move on to the third and last session of today's webinar. Let me introduce you Antonello Monti, Professor at Institute RWTH Wageningen University and Director of the Institute for Automation of Complex Power Systems, and Rainer Bagger, Managing Director of Bagger Energie AG and Technical Advisor of the ETIP SNET Core Team. Please, Antonello and Rainer, the floor is yours.
Yes, thank you very much. I just want to ask Antonello, are you here? Just to...
Yes, I'm here.
Very good. Okay, great. Very good. Thank you very much. Well, we are now in high-level use case 5, which is entitled One-Stop Shop and Digital Technologies for Market Participation. High-level use cases a lot, about technologies and participants of different kinds. This high-level use case really concentrates on the citizen, the consumer, also in the role of prosumers. It does certain parts which the other use cases already have considered, but again, it concentrates at the consumer at the center. This is the key here. ETIP SNET believes, and also the European Commission, that they play a critical role in these adoptions. We need to do the right things so that this happens.
Rainer, I'm sorry to interrupt.
Yes, please.
I think that your connection is not working properly. I would suggest maybe to switch off your camera to reduce. Yeah, didn't.
Okay. I hope it's better
okay,
now.
that's
Is
perfect.
it better now? I hope.
It should be. Thank you.
Okay, let's try. So the prosumer will play a big role not only in the change and transition of the electricity sector, but also especially in the cross-sectorial infrastructure changes, which also is needed to intensify and accelerate the electrification. So, for example, when consumers need new heat pumps or when they connect the electrical vehicles, all that needs to be considered from the consumer or prosumer point of view. So it is necessary to integrate also the energy system in the wider picture of the data economy, so that the consumers, maybe in the role as energy consumers or as citizens, are included in the right way, so that they know what this is about, that they understand, that they have the right picture of what does this transition of the energy system mean to him or her. This is very important. On the technology side, and this may be invisible to the prosumer or consumer, we need to develop the standard interfaces, communication solutions into the homes, into the buildings, and of course, the secure, cyber-secure communication solutions. Next slide, please. So, like in the other high-level use cases, we have ETIP SNET has, defined 4 use cases which need to be started now in this IP period, 22 to 25, and we have 2 PPCs which we believe can start a little bit later after the 4 PPCs have been analyzed deep enough. PPC 5.1 is about the value of consumer customer acceptance and engagement. 5.2 is the plug and play devices and IoT, including security by design. 5.3 is about how to utilize the communication networks, including, of course, cybersecurity. And 5.4 is about cross-sectorial flexibility use cases. So how to apply it in a wider range. And later, we talk about even bigger large-scale demonstrations in PPC 5.5. And we are sure that this is an issue in 5.6. We need to create consensus on the consumer solutions. We have massive number of consumers, and how do we get standardized solutions, talk to each other in the right way, and but this will need to be considered in later IPs. I hand now over the word to Antonello to dig into the 4 PPCs. Antonello, please.
Thank you very much. Good, I would say now afternoon, given 12 after 12, also from my side. So first PPC 5.1 is value of consumer customer acceptance and engagement. I would say this PPC has 2 dimensions. The first dimension is summarized in the platform requirement so we are looking for a platform that will accelerate the adoption of the new energy services and technologies, and then the aspect of data. These are anyway mostly focusing on the technology aspect. So let me try to give kind of a broader picture of what the use case is trying to reach. If I think about customer engagement, right now we have several roadblocks which are not allowing the kind of involvement we would like to have from the customers. And these are aspects like simplicity and easy access, and making sure that we don't require an engineer to become part of the system. This is one thing, but there is the social element, which is also what is going to motivate people to get involved. In the 5.1, we bring these 2 things together, because we need to develop the guidelines for the participation of prosumers. We need to devise the incentive. And of course, first idea is to consider that those incentives will be related to dynamic prices, tariff, and other market incentive. We need the software tools that will support this process. And we need to be sure then the customers are fully engaged in the picture. So the social part, which starts with increasing the customer awareness, so getting the acceptance of what's going on, is kind of like the starting point. And we need to understand the consumer needs also when the consumer have, let's say, the interest and the willingness to self-organize, like in energy community, how we support such approach. And keep in mind also that when we say customer, we should always specify that there are two, let me say, categories of customers. So customers intended as private citizens, but also customers industry. And when you look at the total amount of power we are talking about, clearly, the second is not a secondary aspect. So the 5.1 has the ambition that through understanding the need and understanding how to engage the customers, we understand a platform concept that is really built around the customer. What is different, I would say, with the past is that normally platforms are being built around products, not around people. And I think this idea that is behind the whole name of the use case, high-level use case, sorry, is this one-stop shop. Is really saying my focus is strictly the customer, not the products. And that's a kind of revolution from the IT perspective in the way we think, because we're always thinking, okay, there is a product for PV, there's a product for battery, and so on and so forth, or whatever appliance. It's always been product centered. The one-stop shop is going on the other direction and making sure that the customers are the real focus of our point of start, so that then the customer can easily access any kind of service or provide any kind of service, being now a customer active. And that's where the requirements and the technology should meet. So these two dimensions I mentioned at the beginning should find in this level the point of connection. Then if we have this idea in mind, so if 5.1 we built the specification but also implementation of this new principle of customer-centric platform, so if we need a customer-centered grid, we need a customer-centered platform as a point of access. We need to understand all the other, let's say, technology requirements that are kind of falling down from the activity of 5.1. So that's what brings us to 5.2, which is about plug-and-play devices in IoT, including security by design. So here we focus on two elements. Again, simplicity, that's plug and play, and security, because we want to be sure that the customer can join without any risk. And at the end, we always have to remember that when we talk about risk from the customer perspective, in the customer actively involved, it means also risk from the point of view of the infrastructure. So it's a bigger and social type of risk. So in the 5.2, we are really talking about what we define as real plug and play situation, so that allow the customer to easily get into the system, get into a data exchange systems without too much complexity. This means also the other way around. So because at the end, it's about data exchange, so that would be also the possibility of data going in both directions in a plug and play way of operation, but also allowing flexibility in how this should happen. That means that we can imagine also application that will be in direction of peer-to-peer technology like blockchain. So this way in which we reach the plug and play of devices should be defined in the broader sense, so that we are open for different type of architecture and different type of solutions, and we don't build from the beginning an approach to plug and play that automatically encompass a specific architecture or only one type of architecture. And So this means then making possible the use of IoT for many activities, including monitor and control, creating an easy integration in things like demand response from the point of view of the systems that links clearly to the smart appliances. But it goes beyond, I would say, the smart appliances, because it's about really making the customer part of the Internet of Things. So in a complete integration from a data perspective, but as mentioned in the title itself, of course, this has to be done with security by design, which means that we have to, from the beginning in the 5.2, have in mind that it's wrong to develop solutions that add security, but start with security as requirement from the beginning. We can move to the next slide for the other PPC in this high-level use case. Then after the connection, from the connection, you move up, and the next step is clearly the communication. There is no question that there will not be a single way of communicating. There are different options, and all those options should be facilitated, but should be facilitated having in mind cybersecurity. So here, the topic is about understanding how the different mechanisms of interconnection that customer may have, and again, customer should be extended not only to private customer, but to industry customer, how the different one can be built in a way to be secure from the beginning. And that means that, of course, this is mostly about cybersecurity, so analyzing risk and vulnerability, and the interaction with legacy systems. It means also, when you say security, is also privacy. So, you know, when we have data traveling, we know they have to respect GDPR. We have to be sure that the system is built in such a way that this type of protection from the customer is intrinsically embedded. And another important aspect is to look at the last, let's say, generation of communication technologies available. In particular, the idea is to have a special consideration of 5G networks. 5G networks will bring interesting new opportunity in relation to connection, but also security, because principles like network slicing or concept of virtual operators integrated in the system will allow different way to use the communication channels. And so in doing this exercise, it's critical that we keep in mind also this aspect. To complete the first set of PPC that are part of this high-level use case, we have the cross-sectorial flexibility use case. I think this is a topic that partly have been already addressed in previous calls in the Horizon Europe program, but we are still, I would say, at the early level of maturity. So there is still a lot of work to be done. And the thing is, basically, we need to talk the language of the customers. So that goes back a little bit to the 5.1, but now tackling more in details specific services. We talk about flexibility all the time. For us, involved in the whole story of the energy system transformation, it's pretty clear. But if you go to the guy on the streets and you talk about flexibility, this is not an easy topic. And first of all, it's not clear why should he care. So what we want to achieve here is to expand on the view that thanks to sectorial crossing and involving different sectors in the provision, we have the possibility to address flexibility in a way that is more understandable for the customers. And this is naturally one nice mechanism to increase, because again, having the customer at the center, we speak the language of the customer. And this is, I think, the major point has been missing a lot in the work we have been done so far. We've been talking the word of the technicians and not the word of the customer, the language, sorry, of the customers. And that's the way to look at how to build flexibility, both the residential and the industry sector, and then link it to other sector. Of course, first idea is always thermal, but we need to imagine also to be broader. And that's why also here we mentioned security or health. And there is a lot that can be still understood and explored in this direction. I think we can move now to the next high-level use case. So back to you, Rainer. Rainer, are you there to introduce high-level use case 7?
Yes, do you hear me? Hello?
Yes, now we can. Perfect.
Very good. Sorry, I had a connection problem, but all is fine now. Where the use case 5 was with the consumer at the center, we now go to the use case 7 with the entity dealing with the supervision of the system in the center. And we call use case 7 enhanced system supervision and control, including the key element of cybersecurity. When we deal with this high-level use case in general, we really want to have realized smarter electricity networks. Which of course need to do to integrate and accommodate all the decentralized elements everywhere in Europe down to the local areas. By doing that, we strongly are convinced that the decentralized monitoring and control by all types of network digitalization is needed. We need cyber-secure communication networks. We really need to deal with the insights of R&I of these elements, but we need also to apply them in demonstration and pilots. We do not only need smarter density of the network, so how to expand the networks, but we also, on the lower levels, but we also need to look at the right interconnection capacities across Europe, across countries. And there we need harmonized security, planning and operation standards. Standards is key, and we need to do much more there. We need to have smarter transparency to market participants all over Europe by really rethinking the concept of the control room, both at the high voltage level, at the TSO level, and at the lower distribution grid levels with DSOs as key actors. Doing so means redefining the functionalities and the fundamentals of these system architectures. The control room may be a centralized place, but for sure with more distributed intelligence, and how to organize that is a key question. For example, and above all, for distribution grids, how do we design the new distribution control centers there? And of course, when you are in the control room, we need smarter operational concepts that have impact on those who are doing this control on the workforce. So these experts, these people need new types of human-machine interfaces. They need training to get used to the new environments, to the new changing circumstances over time in the next 10 years. And we need to have that to prepare the workforce to operate under the modified conditions. Next slide, please. So again, we have divided the priority project concepts into 2 parts. Those which start first, the first 4. These are 7.1 is the next generation of transmission system operator control rooms. On the other side, in 7.2, we are talking about the next generation of distribution management systems. How do they need to be organized? 7.3 is about the next generation of measurements and geographic information systems, especially for distribution grids. And as number 4 here, we have a key technology, which is right now used already quite a lot in the transmission system. This is about wide area monitoring, control, and protections. And later, we ETIP SNET thinks that we need, of course, to deal with the grid operator of the future. We need to deal with a total redesign of the way people look at this new system by a new human-machine interface. In 7.7, we talk about large-scale demonstration activities, and in 7.8, the fundamental and key standardization activities needed in this field. And again, I hand over to Antonello, please.
Yeah, thank you. So let's start first of all with the 7.1, 7.2. The 7.1 deals with the TSO control room. And basically, we need to link to what Nuno presented also in one of the high-level use cases, talking about the new role of the power electronics. So the system is significantly changing. We know that we have a more distributed asset, but we have completely new type of assets with new type of dynamics. And so it's clear that we need to rethink everything when it comes to the central role of the TSOs. So what kind of software basically has to run in the control room, how the control room has to be thought and structured to fulfill the new mission. And so that means, first of all, understanding the ICT requirements and dealing now with systems that have higher level of dynamics. So putting new type of requirements in terms of real-time communication and data exchange. We need to bring that at regional, but also international level. So the data exchange has to grow. This is a bottom line. And so if I sit on the point of view, the TSO means I have to exchange more internally, let's say, data I need to acquire. I need to exchange more with neighbor TSOs, but, and that's the link, and we'll come later to the 7.2, also my interaction with this, with the DSO has to change. Now, we need a more integrated intelligence type of thinking, and that's what is putting challenges. At the same time, there are clearly new situations that were not the focus of the system. A very good example, strictly again related to this penetration of power electronics, is the real-time estimation of parameters that were not normally critical in the past because were stable and quite reliable. And that means damping, system inertia, short circuit power in certain nodes. All those parameters will change and will play a much more critical situation. We learn so much, for example, for the famous blackout in Australia, how the knowledge of system inertia is today critical to anticipate possible critical situation. But that means and tells us also that the techniques we use to identify critical situation have to be updated for the new type of challenges, particularly, again, related to low inertia systems. And like I said, this is about a tighter also interaction with the distribution grid, with the dispersed generation. They all have to be, at the end, allowing the TSO to build a concept of observability that, let me say, can be multi-scale in the sense that depending on the condition, different level of details may be needed. And this is a quite new type of principle. So it's a scalable hierarchical observability type of situations that allow us to use the data in a different way, in a different conditions, and at the same time building a consolidated type of concept. This goes in direction, of course, of self-healing technique and also how you present results. There is a special PPC later about the user interface, but that's something from the beginning, also in the first one, has to be part of the discussion. And also modeling tools that allow this multi-hierarchical situation, aggregation, disaggregation of data and models that allows to properly operate the grid. And yes, when you design the new control room, of course, together your friend you can never lose is the cybersecurity aspect, because of course we have much more an IT dependent systems, so that cybersecurity becomes even a bigger concern. That says for the TSO, of course, situation is similar in one sense also for the DSO, because of course we need also here a new architecture for an advanced distribution management system. They are the one directly in contact with the distributed energy resources, and also the one that has to provide the link to the TSO. So while the DSO role is evolving, the control room, so the DMS, has to evolve together with the transformation. So we need to rethink also here the control center architecture, having in mind the possibility of distributed control. We had already a lot of experience in the past programs, concepts like web of cells, or even ideas like microgrid integrating those. How is the DSO linking to those distributed intelligence is a new element that has to be brought to the control center at the distribution level. Of course, then you have flexibility as requirement in the control room, reconfiguration, and as, of course, as mentioned for TSO, or the same for DSO, we have to keep in mind the challenges related to cybersecurity. Moving to the next slide. We have to keep in mind, as was mentioned probably by Rainer, we enter in a data system. So we have a new variety of source of data that are available, and this data will allow, or should allow, a better operation and a better planning. So again, we talk also here about the concept of scalable and hierarchical observability, but having in mind here the availability of data from a variety of resources. And so IC architecture able to support massing data communication, and here link to the smart meters. Of course, this is mostly a DSO level data, so the DSO challenge. So we have as a major element to integrate geographical information on one end, and at the same time customer information through the smart meter infrastructure. So we need to investigate a new type of data that this will bring, also new type of measurement that can be available in the system, and how this different source of data can be integrated in the process in a smooth way. The idea is an online capability of planning and operations. So one element of the digitalization is to somehow break the barrier between planning and operation, and this massive integration of data is the key element that makes this integration possible. The last topic, so the 7.4, focus on one specific measurement technology, phasor measurement unit. As mentioned, they have been around for quite a while. They showed already quite some value in transmission, but the impression is that we are still have a lot to learn and explore on what is possible. This is true at transmission level, but as well at distribution level. Why is that? Well, what has been shown already at scientific level that, for example, through the phasor measurement unit, we can speed up the process of state estimation, making the problem linear. And that's critical because we are getting more and more in the situation. The state estimation has to be repeated more often because the dynamic are faster, and even enter in the concept of dynamic state estimation. So moving away from the idea that the electrical infrastructure can be treated constantly steady state, and it's a huge challenge, links to the previous ideas of building digital twins. These are very advanced ideas of digital twin that adapt and dynamically follow the evolution of the system to support real-time observability, particularly to make sure that the renewable energy resources are properly integrated in the system. With that, I think we complete also the second one, and we need to speed up to complete also number 9. Rainer, back to you.
Thank you.
Sorry for the interruption. Just would like to let you know that we still have 7 minutes.
Yes, we will hurry up a little bit.
Thank you.
It's the last high-level use case which we talk about, but not the least, to be clear on that. And it is called flexibility provision by buildings, districts, and industrial processes. The key issue here from the ETIP SNET point of view is the flexibility provision by these elements. It's not the internals of these elements, which are of course very complex, but dealt in other ETIPs and research areas. We want the output of that to be in the right way. And clearly, buildings, districts, and processes have a lot to do with renewable heating and cooling. And this is a huge part of the end energy consumed. We need to do the right thing also in terms of integration and of flexibility provision, clearly. At national, regional, and local level, we need to do all that we get this concept of renewable self-consumption and renewable energy communities developed in the right way. This has to do with planning, with infrastructures, with waste also, heat and cold, to do that in the right way. And really important as the third sub-bullet, we need to go from the building to the wider part, to the wider neighborhood, but even up to the smart city level, you know, so buildings aggregated, build smart cities, and this needs to be done in the right way. We also need to enable the efficient and effective integration of smart communities in the energy system. This includes connectivity issues, how to participate in the market, how to control, and how to get a strong, resilient system. Integrating heating and cooling is not a standalone task. It has to do strongly with the electricity grid, the electricity flow, the management, and at the end, we have to have effective participation of all participants in the new markets by having smarter control mechanisms, technologies, and in the end, coupling, you know, of the various sectors in an effective way. Next slide, please. Very briefly, we have 5 PPCs. 3 are to be done now. They are about value assessment. Second, about control and operation of the buildings and smart communities. And third, about planning for the resilient integration of these buildings and infrastructures in an integrated energy system. Later, we talk more about well-functioning markets around these buildings, and at a 5th place, it's about governance for an effective integration of buildings and these smart communities. Antonello, please.
Yeah, thank you. At least I have only 3, not 4 here now, so I can be a little bit faster. So first one is the value assessment of the integration of buildings, infrastructure and smart communities in a REST-based energy system. So basically 9.1 is about creating the condition for an effective integration of renewable generation for multiple sectors, having building as the center. So that means it's all about integration of efficient carbon neutral buildings, integration of building flexibility in the distribution network, integration, of course, a little bit a level of aggregation of local energy community, district, and smart cities. So here we are focused on making sure that the generations assets are there. There are the business models that support this provision so that the building can become that type of resource that we need, both from a generation perspective and also from a flexibility perspective, because what it's about the sector integration in building level is that the building becomes and this flexible asset with flexibility in both directions, which makes it an incredible resource because you can go in both directions, supporting, let's say, positively with injection or negatively by active as load. So here is the goal is an increased share of renewable energy sources in the energy systems. But again, here we mean in both directions as it makes sense for building. Going to the second, the 9.2, assuming, you know, the goal of 9.1 are feasible, then we need to understand the control part. So 9.2 is about the control and operation for the buildings. So what is the right approach to make the best use of the new resources that we have? And so that means, of course, control methods and ICT solutions that will make that possible, and having in mind different level also of aggregation, as mentioned before already, the level of community, or even, let's say, more classically say microgrid, and also going all the way to system level. So it deals while the role of the home energy management systems, that is this element in the middle between the new element of resources and the grid. And so how this coupling can be optimized in a modern building that is equipped with the resources based on renewables. The of course task, and then at the end is of course to achieve demand flexibility in the residential sector and demand flexibility in the industrial sector. Of course, this is not only, in every case, whatever technology and solution we look at is not only at the single element, but also thinking the interface as a community, so as an aggregated party. So both levels are an important part in this respect. Concluding, by last minute, we're going to 9.3. And the 9.3 deals with planning for resilient integration of building and infrastructure. So now that we have these control systems in place, so that's the sequence: assure the resources, build the best control, make the best use for the infrastructure. So that's what 9.3 is about. Once we have those community organized with the best type of control as defined in 9.2, 9.3 will make the best use from the point of view of the system resilience. So how those community becomes part of the system level in guaranteeing system level resilience, capacity of recovery, robustness of the infrastructure in extreme event. And every time we talk about extreme event, as mentioned here, we refer both to cyber type of attack, but also physical. And we should say, when we say physical, means somebody touching physical infrastructure, but also weather related that create physical damage to the system itself. So these are the tools that we want to look at. So how we plan distribution network, considering the community and considering the role they can play now from the point of view of the resiliency, and supporting then a massive integration of those new elements or resources in the distribution grid. With that, we're exactly at 45, so I stop here and give back the floor. Oh, do we have questions? Because we didn't have time for questions so far. I don't see questions in the chat.
Yeah, sorry, I do not see them in my chat. Please, can you?
I don't see questions.
Take them up here, please. Yeah. I do not see any chat questions. Sorry.
No, I confirmed that we don't have any questions in the chat. And thank you very much for the explanation, and also for doing everything on time. We finished it exactly sharply at 45. So if there are no further questions, we can move on with the closing remarks. I will leave the floor to Nikos again for the conclusion and launch of the next webinars series. Nikos, please.
Thank you, Eduardo, and let me thank all the speakers and all the organizers of the sessions, and especially the participants who have with a lot of patience have stayed for all this session. Of course, it's not easy to conclude all these ideas and to provide any overview. I think we tried to show you how we see the future research organized in high-level use cases, in actual results, in project concepts, and in project families. And we have suggested a number of areas of project families that we consider are of priority. And we have discussed them in some detail, providing various aspects that we think needs to be resolved. We don't mean that nothing of that has happened so far. There's already a lot of ongoing research that partly has answered some of these topics, but we think that there is more to be done in order to arrive at solutions that can help us in the energy transition. So let me just add that all these ideas and outcomes have been the result of extensive discussions among the stakeholders of the ETIP SNET, and they form consolidated views. It's the views of the industry and of the operators on what needs to be done so that systems reach the decarbonization goals. And having said that, and since we realized that this was a bombardment of ideas and new concepts and perhaps new topics, we have thought of organizing a follow-up series of webinars, of workshops, where we will focus on each of these three sessions with a more in-depth discussion and more time to exchange ideas and to have more input from the partners, from the participants. So as you see here, we have thought of 3 webinars, a series in May, starting with the high-level use cases 5, 7, and 9. This is the high-level use cases of the digitalization. The last one you heard today. Then there is a focus on the first session that is mostly the system aspect and the transport aspects. And then on the 19th of May, we have a workshop that will mainly deal on markets and on TSO-DSO interactions. So having said that, I don't know if the Commissioner Rocco wants to say a final word, but this is from the ETIP SNET core group. So the floor is yours, George.
Thank you, Nikos.
Nikos.
Thank you, Oko, and thank you all for this very good meeting. Not much to say for me. I think it was very much self-explanatory. It went through the details and explaining your very good report. So I think further discussing this and bringing it to the attention of a wide array of stakeholders is really a good way to go forward. And of course, we'll have our sort of bilateral discussions between the Commission and ETIP SNET on the way forward in more technical terms. Thank you for the very good meeting and goodbye.
Thank you.
George, Nikos, thanks to all of you.
Thank you very much, Oko.
And stay tuned. As you see, there's a few more events upcoming for more in-depth information. Thank you. Goodbye.
Thank you very much, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you, colleagues. Thank you. Bye for now.